Welcome to Perspectives with Wenchi Yu, where we discuss Trump 2.0's policies and politics and their implications for Asia, China, Taiwan, and beyond. This episode is recorded on March 3rd. Earlier today, President Trump announced a significant TSMC investment of $100 billion in the United States over the next 4 years. Praising TSMC as the most powerful company in the world, Trump highlighted the Taiwan-headquartered semiconductor giant, which manufactures 90% of the world's most advanced chips. Driven by the surge in AI development, escalating geopolitical tensions, and Taiwan's own security concerns stemming from China's aggression, TSMC has become one of the most critical companies on the planet. Its dominance in global chip manufacturing makes it Taiwan's Silicon Shield, or in Chinese, 护国神山, literally guardian mountain. In fact, many in Taiwan had predicted a deal between Trump and TSMC to satisfy Trump's desire for the most advanced chips to be produced in the U.S. in exchange for Taiwan's security commitment, especially after the February 28th White House meeting between Ukrainian President Zelensky and Trump. The Trump administration's dramatic 180-degree shift on Ukraine has raised concerns in Taiwan, sending ripples of uncertainty across the Pacific. To further understand how Taiwan navigates the intersection of technology and geopolitical tensions with its crown jewel manufacturing ecosystem, today's guest is Jeremy Chih-Cheng from the Research Institute for Democracy, Society, and Emerging Technology based in Taipei. Welcome, Jeremy. Tell us about your background. How did you get involved in semiconductors?
Hi, Wenchi. Thank you so much for having me. I was trained as a lawyer by training, and actually previously I was teaching law in Japan. I was born and grew up in Taiwan, and after the college, I just moved to Japan to pursue my academic career there in Japan. When I noticed, the geopolitical landscape is going to totally reshape the whole market, because I was teaching.
When was it around that time?
Well, it was the year of 2016. I just received my PhD degree. I taught law in Kyoto University, but I was conducting a series of research on national security and economic security for Japan and the U.S., mostly about the U.S.
Trade war and tariffs and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, tariffs and at the beginning moment, it was like kind of sanctions and then export control. So I spent 1 year to conduct my postdoctoral research there in Harvard University.
And what year was that again?
It was a year of 2017 to 18. And because I was conducting my project for the Japanese funding agencies in Japanese government. So I brought this takeaway back to Japan, and I shifted my career from academic side to policy-making circle. So I started work for the Japanese central government on the economic security related issue. So I was one of the research fellow there in a governmental think tank called the JST, Japan Science and Technology Agency, for the matter of export control, the matter for investment screening system. And I think one of the hottest issue is about the TSMC investment in Japan and in Arizona. TSMC first time announced that they're going to invest there in Arizona. It was the year of 2020. TSMC announced that they're going to invest in Japan in the year of 2021.
And what are Japanese interests about Taiwan's TSMC, other than TSMC's investment in Japan? What are the other aspects about TSMC that was interesting to Japan?
I mean, so after the pandemic or after the US-China from trade war to the high-tech hegemony competition, every country has started to notice about you got to have some valuable capacity of manufacturing some most valuable critical materials, critical technologies.
Do you think the concern is more about shortage of critical technology components, or was it more about competition, geopolitical competition in that sense?
I think in the beginning, because I joined the policy making circle in the year of 2019. During the time, we already have many discussion among that Japan's lacking of capacity of manufacturing advanced node of semiconductor chips. Japan used to be during the 80s.
Yeah, in the 80s. Yeah.
Japan used to has had over 50% share of semiconductor manufacturing capacity, but it just decreased, keeping shrinking, and currently Japan is no longer has that kind of a capacity of manufacturing, especially the advanced node semiconductor chips. And so for them, for the policymakers there, it was a huge anxiety. So Japan started to think that economic security should be the core part of the national policy for the future of this country. Then the pandemic comes and the shortage, and Japanese automobile manufacturers are lacking of the semiconductor chips. Nobody can keep in manufacturing the cars.
What you described in Japan seemed to be the same scenario in the US, sort of the awakening to the need to onshore semiconductor manufacturing capabilities in the United States. So how did you move from Japan back to Taiwan?
The policy-making circle or top tier of the policy decision makers here in Taiwan also noticed this trend, because previously Taiwan, we adopted kind of industrial policy based on introducing more and more manufacturing sectors here on this island nation. The business model is like just B2B. They were just taking the order from the clients and manufacture. The clients there in the US, the clients there in China, it just doesn't matter, because for the past 3 decades, we were in the era of globalization, and everybody was looking for the efficiency. Every decision was driven by the market value, and so Taiwanese policymakers has dependency on promoting the business, right? Just tracing the flow of the money, tracing the flow of the investments. But the US-China competition escalated. Policymakers here started to notice that we have a very, very valuable things, which is the capacity of manufacturing semiconductors. And this is not about 1 fabs or 10 fabs. It is about the ecosystem here. Taiwan has an ecosystem on this island nation, composed by, I think, thousands of suppliers running a very, very efficient way of manufacturing. Not only the manufacturing, but also the R&D part. R&D on hardware manufacturing. So because ecosystem here, Taiwan can produce most efficient from the electronic components, electronic devices to semiconductor chips. And this is valuable because you cannot copy and replicate this ecosystem within a short term to somewhere else.
How long did it take for Taiwan to build up this ecosystem?
In the beginning, it was based on the industrial policy, but then I think the driven power is not about the government. It's about the market. So I think at least 3 decades, Taiwan TSMC started to open exchange their stock the year of 9. That was kind of a milestone for Taiwan, started to gain the capacity of manufacturing comparatively higher added value semiconductor chips.
The history of Taiwan and China semiconductors is also quite interesting. You kind of mentioned that during the years of globalization, it doesn't really matter what Taiwan is manufacturing for. Could be for the US, could be for Chinese clients as well. Was there any national security concern at that time? Any restrictions?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. So everybody now is discussing about economic security, from export control, inbound investment screening system, or outbound investment screening systems. During the Biden administration, the United States finally announced the US version of the outbound investment screening system, and the federal government, based on the executive order from President Biden. And in the last couple of days, they finalized rule. But in Taiwan, we were the only country that has the outbound investment screening system. now, which is control the flow of the money investing foreign countries. In the year of 1993.
1993, it already started.
Yeah. So we are 30 years ahead of the U.S.
And what was the reason that Taiwan started so early? And
right,
I would
because of the
assume
national,
mostly China. Yeah.
Yeah, because firstly, because of a national security concern, there's always a tension between Taiwan Strait. So even in the year of the 90s, that the relation between Taiwan and the PRC became better. The decision makers in the top tier of the Taiwanese government still has an anxiety because the PRC might invade in Taiwan. Another layer of anxiety is about the outflow of the capacity of Taiwan's industrial bases. Because after the Tiananmen Square, everybody started to invest China because everybody was thinking that China should be the next, destination, next hub. For
huge
manufacturing,
market.
world factory. So including Taiwanese, the first wave foreign capital invested China was the Taiwanese investors, because really easier for us to leverage our language, so like the cultural similarity. So we just copy and replicate it and paste it. Our business model, the manufacturing models there in the Chinese soil benefit from their low cost of like laborers or environment.
We need more workers too.
And we can, expand our scale into 10 times or 100 times. It doesn't matter because China has a huge market and China has a huge capacity. Every investor during the early 90s, they was rushed to China and then invest, created the huge, much larger capacity there in Chinese soil. But from the Taiwanese government perspective, it's a double layer of anxiety. Thirdly, national security concern. Secondly, the outflow of the capital, outflow of the capacity of manufacturing, and the outflow of talents. And so the key decision makers, led by President Li Denghui. I don't know, Wenchi, if you still remember 借机用人. I don't know how to directly translate this term, right?
No haste.
Like, yeah.
Be patient, no haste. Yeah.
This is be patient. So, and based on this term, so Li Denghui introduced Taiwan's version of outbound investment screening system. So no countries was, has even a kind of similar policy. Taiwan really was a kind of a unique case. So even
was Taiwan focused on any particular industry at that time, or was it more blanket, if you exceed certain capital amount, you need government permission, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so at the beginning, because Taiwan still doesn't recognize the PRC as a national state, Taiwan still recognized that under Taiwan's constitutional law, PRC is a part of Taiwan. But it's unrealistic. President Li Denghui introduced a legal framework called Cross-strait Relation Act, Cross-strait Act. It regulates
关系条例法是吗?
Yes. 两岸关系条例. So it regulates whatever the activities, the exchanges, trade, marriage, travel, every activities until today. We are regulating the Taiwan-China relations based on the Cross-strait Act, not based on the general Taiwanese legal framework. So in the beginning, so it's just kind of administrative level of the regulation to restrict the investment, based on the amount in the beginning. And then I think 2002 or 2003, if I remember correctly, during the time we have a UMC invested China. There's a 合建案. UMC is the second largest semiconductor foundry manufacturer. And UMC was trying to replicate its manufacturing model here in Taiwan to build a larger fab in Chinese soil. So the dispute happened between Taiwanese government and the UMC.
He wanted to invest more in China, but Taiwan government was concerned, right?
So and they want to circumvent the regulation I previously mentioned to have their capacity be built up there in Chinese soil.
Yeah, and at that time, the Taiwan government is the DPP as the ruling party.
Yes, is Okay. was already shifted from the KMT to the DPP government. They noticed that the cross-strait relation act, the outbound investment screening system wasn't functional enough. So make more restriction based on the technology. So they firstly introduced a document called Critical Technology Group in semiconductor manufacturing, including panel manufacturing. We no longer have a panel industry anymore because it's already totally replaced by the Chinese competitor around financial crisis. So firstly, you're going to decide whether the investment toward China should receive a prior approval from Taiwanese government based on the amount and then based on the technology you are investing. So we have a review system within the MOEA.
Yeah. What about inbound restriction, meaning Chinese investment into Taiwan?
Yeah, of course. Almost all the countries has an inbound investment screening system because that
on the ground of national security.
Yeah. That's more directly related to the national security. Until today, it's still the same. Around 2022, Taiwanese government has charged many Chinese shell company who had set up their branch here in Hsinchu Science Park, supplying the IC design related technologies for Chinese IC design companies or Chinese tech companies because it's violated of Taiwan's inbound investment screening system. So if you want to invest in Taiwan, you want to have your own office, you want to have your subsidiary, you want to have even just a branch here in Taiwan, you should receive a prior approval from the Taiwanese government.
But they just did that without the approval, or they actually had a Taiwanese person helping them?
No, they just did that without the approval based on the cross-strait act.
Yeah. And what about headhunting? Because I've also read stories about...
So I think that's the stand. You cannot even open an office for recruiting engineers.
But it's also well known that Chinese companies poach Taiwanese engineers as well as mid to senior level managers to work in semiconductor. Like the setup of SMIC, I believe, was essentially all Taiwanese in the beginning in China.
I think still now. I think over thousands of Taiwanese engineers still currently working for SMIC. I think Taiwan is still holding most of this so-called patent trade secret for the know-how of manufacturing here on this island nation. So during Biden administration, when President Biden announced the 2022 October 7 export control, restricting the U.S. person to working for the Chinese leading semiconductor manufacturing activities. There's a discussion here in Taiwan or in South Korea.
And so what's the reason that there's no similar rule about limiting Taiwanese citizens to work in Chinese semiconductor industry?
Yeah, I think this is a very hard decision, especially Taiwan is a democratic country. The freedom of travel, it's hard for Taiwan to introduce this kind of a restriction.
Yeah, politically, I'm sure it's a very hard sell.
The year of 1993, we have already this kind of a policy thought that we have to control at least the flow of the talents, because that's too easy for a Taiwanese engineer to set up a company there in China, because if you don't restrict that flow, and eventually that's going to directly have some effect on your national security and economic security as well.
So I'm going to use that logic to think about Taiwan and US relations right now. Domestically in Taiwan, there's this question why Taiwan needs to invest so much in the United States, in terms of in the most critical and valuable sector that Taiwan has. How do you explain that phenomenon?
We are entering into the era of Trump 2.0. The situation might become harder for the Taiwanese because we don't know that the people who are currently in charge of the federal government or the White House are still keeping in mind that the democracies should help each other, whether the mutual value is still the leading value for the allies. Whether the U.S. is still whether the U.S. is still caring about the allies. So previously, because we were the debate within
the
Taiwan,
debate started in the Biden administration, right?
Yeah, the debate was started. Yeah, I think in the Trump 1.0 when TSMC first time announced the investment in Arizona, it already started. Yeah, but I think so everybody agree. I think this is a consensus that TSMC is the national treasure for Taiwan. So we use the 护国神山.
Silicon shield.
But on the other hand, you always have to strike a balance, especially the debate is whether you should, more lean to the US or lean to China.
Almost everything becomes whether you should choose Washington, D.C. or Beijing in Taiwan.
Yeah. So previously, but you look at the trade data, you look at the investment data, especially during the first 2 decades of 21st century. Economically, Taiwan was really much bonding for Chinese side. So during the time, people who has a stronger Taiwan identity or people who has more anxiety on national security tend to agree that we should put more stake there to the states, because the U.S. eventually is going to be the key factors that protect Taiwan's safety, security. And so deepening or strengthening the interdependency between Taiwan and the U.S. is ultimately good for it's good for Taiwan's not only the economy but also national security, right? Because we have already experienced the waves of economic coercion from China. So they are weaponizing the supply chain. If you are relying on them, they're going to weaponize their own market. They're going to weaponize your trade ties and to reach their political goal. So it was the previous cases. So people were tend to support the idea that Taiwan should strengthen the interdependence between the U.S. and Taiwan. But on the other hand, we have been witnessing, especially for these 2 months, that maybe there is a leading thought in the federal government based on isolationism.
In the U.S., yes.
In the U.S. So
and that is Trump 2.0, yes.
Yes. And so that would be tricky for for Taiwan, because whether the U.S. is really caring about the interdependency. If we have to exchange, because we want national security, we want the assurance from the U.S. that if there is a Taiwan contingency and the U.S. is intervene. But if the U.S. really don't assure that we're going to intervene, but you have to invest us, you have to share the most valuable treasure with us without give and take, then that will be very hard, very hard.
Here's what I wanted to get at. That's also the value of the report that your think tank just put out, Walking a Tightrope, Navigating Taiwan-U.S. Semiconductor Security Under Trump 2.0. This has been an issue on a lot of people's mind in Taiwan just these days, right? The whole world basically watched what is happening to the U.S.-Ukraine relationship, from Biden administration's full support to now Trump literally even switching side to support Russia, you can say that. And so for Taiwan, can you share the feelings watching what is happening in Ukraine, and therefore perhaps thinking more about leveraging its most valuable industry, that is semiconductor, in exchange for some kind of Taiwan security, if that could be done?
Yeah, everybody witnessed the Trump-Zelensky meeting in White House. And I think not only for Taiwanese, I think for every people who are living in the U.S. ally country.
For democracies. democracy-loving people.
Has everybody has been sharing a huge anxiety on that maybe the U.S. no longer caring about the allyship, no longer put the value in the front. The relations between the U.S. allies is going to become more and more transactional. The U.S. is just want to make a deal with you based on previously kind of a trustship, but now will become more and more like whatever you have, we have to make a deal. We have to exchange. Here in Taiwan, people still are still debating whether Taiwan is more valuable than Ukraine, because not only geopolitically Taiwan is in the front line of the U.S.-China competition. On the other hand, geotechnically, Taiwan is the hub for manufacturing semiconductors. And if the U.S. is losing Taiwan, it means that the U.S. is losing the future of the technology competition. Second would be, so whether and how Taiwan can reach a deal with Trump. We also have been witness that Japan and the U.S. has reached a deal in the very beginning. So what kind of package we are providing for the U.S., whether the deal should be made by hand over the major capacity of TSMC, or if we expanding our military defense budget, buying more U.S. military equipment, or even buying more LNGs, even investing more on the U.S. Manufacturing capacity, because Foxconn has an ecosystem there in Mexico. If Foxconn or other Taiwanese electronic manufacturers are bounding for the U.S. to manufacture the high added value, high-end technology product, for example, like an AI server, I think this is still realistic. And also because most of the Taiwanese business are B2B. So if the clients demands, right, if Apple, Amazon, Google, those US huge giant, which are our clients, are demanding us to go to the US, and we'll have to say no, because they have to buy it, and they so the increase the cost should have been balanced by our calendars.
Let's just use TSMC or Foxconn as an example. So when you are considering what is a good deal with the United States in order to exchange for some kind of security commitment, so then the bigger question for whether it's TSMC, Foxconn, or alike is, why is the company doing this for the country? Does it even align with their business interests, for example? Is there that kind of thinking? Otherwise, you would say, well, TSMC is an incredible company that would do so much to almost like save Taiwan, right?
So if you compare the policy, especially the industrial policy between Taiwan, Japan, or even South Korea and China, I think Taiwan is kind of unique because Taiwan is one of the country within these East Asia countries that has least top-down industrial policy. So Japanese policymakers or the Japanese private sectors tend to see
they have
as a whole, right? Japan as a whole,
they have the whole ministry, like METI, was basically created to think about that, right?
And South Korea comparatively is not like 100% top down, but almost a very similar. But Taiwan is, I think, totally in the contrary side. So looking back to the past couple of decades, the business was looking for the profit, for the more efficiency, for the market. But the government is looking for their policy goal, their political goal, whatever it is, maintain Taiwan as a independent country, maintain Taiwan's prosperity. But it's just different, and the policymakers cannot directly intervene or cannot use the Taiwanese business as a set and to negotiate and to play the game.
I noticed that Taiwanese government has this very cautious approach to even talking to Taiwanese businesses. Whereas in the US, especially the bigger companies, they work very closely with the US government. In some way, they're all trying to influence government policies or legislation to make sure it's friendly to them. Whereas Taiwan seems to be like, oh, we don't want to be viewed as getting involved with business decision making.
This is a uniqueness of the relation between the private sectors. Those
Why do
B2B
you think that's the
manufacturing
case?
company. Well, in the past 3 decades, it wasn't the case because everybody was pursuing for the market. Everybody was pursuing for the efficiency. National security or national interest wasn't a top their concern, wasn't a top priority in general.
But it's also less industrial policy driven, right?
Yeah, Taiwan, compared to the country I mentioned previously, Taiwan has a less industrial policy. But from now on, the capacity of manufacturing a high efficient, reliable, trustworthy, sustainable semiconductor chips to electronic components, from tiny components to AI server. Only Taiwan has this capacity of manufacturing with the efficiency, and that will become the national treasure for Taiwan in order to negotiate a better condition in this dynamic, uncertain global landscape.
So now that national security is such a major factor, and we also just saw the big announcement coming from the White House today that TSMC is investing $100 billion in addition to the $65 billion that they already announced in past few years. It's kind of strange, to be honest, to see that businesses are directly working with the US government to make announcement here and there. And it seems like those businesses are skipping their government in the case of Taiwan in particular. Share with us, to the extent that this kind of negotiation, was Taiwan involved in terms of the government? What is their role?
Taiwanese government, of course, was involved during the negotiation, but the role of Taiwanese government was like invisible. It's not only the case between TSMC Arizona, but also TSMC Germany, and TSMC Kumamoto. Huge. You don't see Taiwanese government sitting on the negotiation table discussing this deal. This is one of the most interesting things.
And is that because of the special status of Taiwan?
I think, of course, especially from our counterparts in the Japanese or German or even the federal governments, they tend to see this as a sensitive issue. The best interest for our counterparts is directly reaching the deal with a Taiwanese private sector. But the tricky part is for these countries, from the US to the Japan to Germany, everybody has mentioned that this is really critical for our national security and economic security. But if you are reaching the deal government, which is in charge of national security, cannot sit on the table for negotiating. So from Taiwan's perspective, so Taiwan is sharing part of Silicon Shield, whatever you like the term or not.
Now, even more so now, it really feels with this $100 billion, to me personally, it really feels like TSMC is playing this role of protecting Taiwan.
Yeah, well, the TSMC and the manufacturing ecosystem here in Taiwan, again, I think everybody will agree the most valuable part for safeguarding Taiwan. So eventually, how to leverage this ecosystem to make sure that Taiwan can still thrive, the economically thriving, and safe and survive.
And how does the government work with those businesses now that this is literally a national security issue?
Yeah, so cases between the US, Japan, and Germany, Taiwanese government was kind of active, but still maintain a low key. So you don't see any speak from the DPP government side, say this is not good, this is not a fair deal. But of course, the governmental sectors were trying hard to have their roles during the process. They were trying very hard to maintain that Taiwan still preserve the most valuable part here on this island nation, and still trying very hard to reach out some kind of additional deal to leverage the supply chain here. Trying to leverage TSMC. So from outside friendshoring, it's not like offshoring, it's friendshoring, and we're trying building up more, interdependent, democratic supply chain. Based on the value, but we still have to calculate whether, that's a fair deal, whether Taiwan can have a give and take, whether Taiwan can gain some of the valuable part for the nation as well.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, Taiwan has to think for itself. Given where Taiwan is today, it has the most concentrated and valuable semiconductor supply chain ecosystem. But it's also, in this awkward place with the United States. I mean, it's not uniquely Taiwanese problem. It is a common problem for a lot of democratic allies of the United States. They kind of don't know how to maintain this relationship in a traditional way. What can Taiwan do to further reassure its value, especially in terms of economic and security value to the United States?
Well, many uncertainty. Well, so if you only mention about the U.S.-Taiwan relations, so we also can discuss the relations between other like-minded countries, especially Japan or Australia and Philippines or European countries. But if we are focusing on relations with the U.S., especially for the next 4 years, that will be very critical, very challenging. I think still the most valuable part for Taiwan is the ecosystem here. It still takes time for our counterparts in the US to understand the ecosystem of the manufacturing activities here on this island nation, because it's just not like a factory. You can move wherever you want to move.
Yeah.
It is much, much, much more complex. The Silicon Valley has developed its own innovational ecosystem for the past 3 decades. That means at the same time, somewhere else, there is another ecosystem on this island nation has already, most of all of the efforts on developing the most innovative ecosystem for manufacturing. Again, this is for manufacturing, hardware manufacturing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So again, whether it's about 100 billion, or whether it's about 4 years, whether it's about more free fabs there in the US soil, whether the US is regaining the capacity and efficiency of manufacturing the most advanced technology. Manufacturing. So, and if Taiwan still can perform that role of being a hub for manufacturing the most advanced technology, Taiwan's value will be more and more clear, given the increased cost for the semiconductors and the GPU for AI, the AI server, for instance, those for the future of the technology. If everybody is caring more about the connections between the technology and the national security, and if everybody is just thinking that the national security should be prioritized, I think the supply chain as a whole is going to be more and more expensive, especially manufacturing in the US is going to be, make the most advanced technology be more and more expensive and rare. And we are still irreplaceable here for Taiwan, because we are still the driven power for, pushing forward the R&D part. This is the most critical part.
It sounds almost like a double-edged sword. Because it's so valuable, so desirable, a lot of people want that piece. We've heard people like Trump essentially are saying they want semiconductors. So one way is to deepen that collaboration, that partnership. So the interdependency is so strong that Taiwan just cannot disappear, essentially. I think, people like you and many others have been thinking for a long time how to create value for Taiwan, how to really tell the best story of Taiwan so the world actually sees the value of Taiwan. What is your next big research topic?
So we are currently focusing on conducting a serious research on not advanced part of the semiconductor chips, but on the legacy part. So I don't like the term of a legacy chip. I prefer to use the foundational term. It's a kind of because this is the foundation for the technology. And Taiwan is still currently has 50% share of the foundational chip manufacturing. China is catching up, and we are expecting that our market share is going to be replaced by China within 1 year or 2 years. This is much more serious. Everything is serious, but from our point of view, we have to tell a story with our U.S. counterparts as soon as possible for really what happened here at this region, especially on the manufacturing ecosystem. Again, I think the way how people manufacture is still a kind of a puzzle for most of the people there in the US. So we have to tell the truth, and we have to urge the quick actions from the federal government side. Collaborations between Taiwan and the US is especially critical, and we are running out of the time for maintaining the technology manufacturing capacities by the democracies, by the allies. No matter what, Taiwan is still going to be the ally, the friends for the US. We are doing the research.
I hope you do more and come visit the United States. I was interviewing a congressman this morning. He said the same thing. He's like, Taiwanese need to come here, and they need to have more presence. They need to do more outreach. And so hopefully, DSET, your think tank will be able to do more. I think Mark Liu, the former chair of TSMC, also just set up a think tank at UC Berkeley, right? Specifically looking at sort of industrial policy, semiconductor related things. So, we know for the next 4 years, it will be quite interesting. And I really wish Taiwan the best luck in navigating this very, very complex world. So thank you again. This is Perspectives with Wenchi Yu, where we analyze the policies and political strategies of Trump 2.0 and their implications for Asia, China, Taiwan, and beyond. Thank you for watching and listening to our 6th episode. We'll be focusing on Taiwan and semiconductors over the next 3 episodes. We value your feedback. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and podcast. See you next week.